Some women leave footprints in boardrooms. Others in hospital wings, lecture halls, courtrooms. But Mara Morgan? She left hers on kitchen tile. Faint. Repetitive. Always before dawn. Not because anyone asked her to. But because it was the only time no one needed anything from her. And needing nothing was the closest thing she had to freedom. Alright, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. It's a story about a woman who paid the price for everyone's comfort, and was forgotten anyway. She was 44. A woman shaped by silence. A caretaker with calloused hands and a heart full of receipts. No one ever asked what she wanted for breakfast. They only noticed when the orange juice ran out. She didn't raise her voice. She wrote checks. That was her love story, one line at a time. Not signed with passion, but persistence. Mara always woke before the sun. Not out of necessity, but instinct. It was the only time the house was quiet, when her existence didn't revolve around reacting to someone else's need. She padded into the kitchen in her worn robe, the fabric thinning at the elbows. The light outside was faint, bluish. The kind of dawn that barely touches the sky. The chair she always sat in gave a soft protest as she settled. Same spot. Same hour. Same ritual. The checkbook lay open on the table. Pen beside it. Envelope stacked neatly in front of her like unspoken demands. She didn't sigh. She never sighed anymore. She just started writing. 320 for the orthodontist. 65 for Ivy's violin. Electricity. Water. Cell phones. A portion of her part-time paycheck went to groceries no one thanked her for. The rest evaporated into things no one noticed were ever missing. She signed each check with the same slanting stroke. Her thumb hovered over her name when she finished, as if pressing her identity into it, sealing it, not with pride, but with the quiet desperation of someone who feared being forgotten. She rose and opened the refrigerator, scanning the contents by memory. Eggs. Milk. Bread Ivy wouldn't eat. The shelves were organized, efficient, but always a little too empty. Another note, grocery run. She'd do it in between cleaning someone else's office and waiting for the youngest to finish soccer practice. She closed the fridge and her eyes fell on the magnet pinned to the surface. Family is everything. It was chipped now. Came from a Christmas stocking years ago. She had hung it there. No one asked why. She lifted it and tucked the checks beneath it, aligning their corners. A practiced, sacred offering. Footsteps echoed from the upstairs hallway. She didn't look up. Doors creaked. Pipes groaned. The house began its waking routine, flushing toilets, running faucets, muffled voices. Not a single one said her name. She moved back to the table, pulled another envelope toward her. Her fingers were steady, but her chest felt tight. Mara didn't cry. Crying was for those who had witnesses. She simply wrote. And disappeared into the lines of someone else's life, again. The hallway light flickered overhead, buzzing softly as Mara moved through it. The walls were lined with family photos, but none of them had her face. David's late wife, Anna, smiled from almost every frame. Her eyes bright, her hair always perfectly done, one arm wrapped around Ivy in one photo, both arms cradling the baby boy in another. The frames were dusted. By Mara. Always. She paused at one photo. Ivy couldn't have been older than 8. David's arm curled protectively around her tiny shoulders. The same protective arm that now rested loosely around Mara in sleep, most nights. Loosely. Never quite tight enough. Mara stared at the image longer than she meant to. She knew this house like the back of her hand, the loose floorboard near the laundry room, the one kitchen drawer that always stuck, the stubborn window in the master bath that never opened all the way. She'd fixed those things herself. She'd painted the walls, bought the curtains, picked out every plate and bowl. She learned everyone's allergies. Remembered birthdays. Paid for the plumber when the pipes froze last winter because David forgot. And yet, nothing in this house bore her name. The mail on the entryway table? All addressed to David. The mortgage, the deed? Still in his and Anna's name. Even the kids' school records had emergency contacts, but Mara was always second. She moved into the living room to fold the throw blankets left scattered from last night. The kids had watched a movie, popcorn spilled on the carpet, soda cans half empty, one pillow stained with chocolate. She cleaned it without a word. Not because she had to. Because no one else would. Because if she didn't, the mess would sit there until someone complained about it. She bent to pick up a sock that had been abandoned near the coffee table. It's not about the sock. It's about being the one who always bends. From upstairs came Ivy's voice, sharp, annoyed. Where's my black hoodie? The good one. No please. No question. Just the assumption that Mara would know. That she had probably already washed it. Folded it. Hung it up neatly. Mara didn't answer. She walked back to the kitchen and opened the laundry room door. There it was. Ivy's hoodie. Still damp, but clean. She hung it over a chair to finish drying. Adjusted the sleeves so they wouldn't wrinkle. She'll wear it today. Slammed the front door behind her. Won't say thank you. Won't remember I even touched it. David came down the stairs, tying his tie with one hand, holding his phone in the other. He kissed Mara's cheek absent-mindedly as he passed, already speaking into the phone. Yeah, I'm leaving now. No, she's got everything handled. He was gone before she could say good morning. Mara stood in the quiet again, surrounded by the walls she painted, the lives she managed, the family she held together. And for a moment, she wondered what would happen if she just stopped. Would anyone notice? Mara watched the front door close behind David, the sound of it clicking shut lingering longer than it should have. It used to mean something when he left. A warm kiss. A shared smile. A whispered I'll miss you. Now it was just the end of one task and the beginning of another. She poured herself a fresh cup of coffee, not because she needed it, but because it was the only ritual she hadn't given up. She leaned against the sink, letting the mug warm her hands, though her insides still felt cold. Mara remembers how it feels when he kissed my cheek. Once, that would have made my whole day bloom. Now I'm not sure if he even noticed who he kissed. Her eyes drifted to the counter where David's watch still lay, forgotten. She picked it up, smiling faintly. He used to leave it behind on purpose, just to have an excuse to return and steal one more kiss. Now? She checked the time. Too late to chase after him. Too early to let herself cry. 12 years ago. The memory came uninvited but vivid. David, younger, grief heavy on his shoulders, sat across from Mara in a small-town coffee shop. His fingers fumbled with his wedding ring, spinning it absent-mindedly on the table. Mara, tentative but kind, slid a napkin toward him. You don't have to be okay right now. You just have to keep breathing. David looked at her like she was water and he'd been walking a desert. He said, I don't know why, but, when I'm with you, it doesn't hurt as much. She didn't say anything. Just reached for his hand. That moment became everything. Now, the only thing between them was silence, and receipts. Grocery totals. Medical payments. A checkbook full of Mara's sacrifices. She often wondered if David still saw her. Not in passing, not in practical terms, but saw her, the woman who climbed into his broken world and chose to stay. She remembered the first time he called her beautiful. It was after she made a terrible meatloaf and set off the smoke alarm. They laughed until they cried, and he kissed her in the smoky kitchen like he'd never kissed anyone before. That kiss hadn't happened in years. Now, when he touched her, it was casual. A tap on the shoulder. A brush of his hand against hers when reaching for the coffee pot. The warmth was gone. Or maybe it was hiding. She wanted to ask him things. Do you still love me? Would you marry me again if you had to choose today? Do you know how lonely I am, even when you're right beside me? But the questions lived in the back of her throat, where old tears went to die. She walked to the hall closet and pulled out his umbrella. Left it by the door where he'd see it tomorrow. Not that he'd realize she put it there. She thinks. Maybe that's the truest version of love. Doing everything without needing applause. But some days, God help me, I still want to be seen. Her phone buzzed. A grocery coupon alert. She sighed. Back to work. She grabbed her keys and her tote bag and stepped into the drizzle, her figure swallowed by the gray morning. The house stood behind her, clean, quiet, and ungrateful. Just the way it always was. The fluorescent lights at the grocery store flickered as Mara pushed the cart down the cereal aisle. Her list, written in neat cursive, was folded 3 times and tucked into her sleeve. She didn't need to look at it, she'd memorized it after years of repetition. Granola bars for Josh. Oat milk for Ivy. The expensive almond crackers David liked. Toilet paper. Dish soap. Tampons, just in case Ivy had another emergency and forgot to buy her own. She passed a display of strawberries and paused. They were on sale. Ivy loved strawberries, at least, she used to. Back when she was small enough to eat them without criticizing how they were sliced. Mara picked a box, checked the ripeness, then placed it gently into the cart. She didn't buy herself anything. She hadn't in a while. Later that day. Groceries spilled onto the counter. Ivy stood by the fridge, scrolling on her phone. Mara. I got the oat milk you like. And strawberries. They were on sale. Ivy, why, without looking up. Those aren't organic. Mara. They looked fresh. I thought you'd still want them. Ivy. You thought wrong. She walked away without another word, leaving her mother standing in the middle of the kitchen, holding the strawberries like a gift no one wanted. It's not just fruit. It's never just about the fruit. Josh came in next, dumped his backpack on the floor, and rummaged through the bags. You forgot the good granola bars, he asked Mara. Mara said. I got the same brand as last time. Josh. Yeah, well, those suck. He grabbed a juice box and left. No hi. No, how was your day? Just expectations met with disappointment. Mara leaned against the counter. She rubbed her temples, trying to stay calm. She reminded herself that teenagers were difficult. That she signed up for this. That this was love. But it didn't feel like love. It felt like servitude. Years ago. Young Ivy, maybe 8, ran up to Mara with a handmade card. The crayon drawing showed a stick figure Mara holding hands with Ivy under a big sun. This is you. You make our house warm. Mara kissed her forehead, tears in her eyes. That drawing hung on the fridge for years, until Ivy replaced it with photos of herself and her friends. Mara didn't even notice when the card disappeared. Mara finished putting away the groceries. Alone. Again. She took the strawberries and placed them in a ceramic bowl, rinsed them carefully, and left them on the counter. Just in case Ivy changed her mind. She stood there for a long time, watching the water drip off the fruit. and asked herself. They think love is a grocery bag that magically refills. But even miracles get tired. From the living room, Ivy shouted. Did you pay for my field trip yet? Mara didn't answer right away. Her hand gripped the edge of the counter. Mom? Hello? It wasn't the word that stung. It was how casually she said it. Like it was an obligation. A placeholder. Mara took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and answered. Yes, Ivy. I paid for it. No thank you. No smile. Just silence again. Mara wiped her hands on a dish towel and folded it neatly. Then she looked down at her checkbook sitting on the table. Open. Always open. The laundry had finished its final cycle, but Mara didn't move to unload it. Instead, she stood in the hallway outside the family room, her gaze caught by the gallery wall that stretched from floor to ceiling. There were over 30 framed photographs. Vacations. Birthdays. Christmas mornings. Poolside summers. First day of school snapshots lined up in meticulous order. She stepped closer. Anna's smile greeted her in almost every frame. Bright. Polished. Camera ready. Ivy nestled against her side. Josh on David's shoulders, grinning with missing teeth. Even the dog looked happier back then. Mara tilted her head. She'd been in this family for over a decade. She had packed their lunches, paid their bills, picked them up from soccer and school dances and therapy appointments. She had attended every game, every recital, every miserable parent-teacher conference. And yet, she wasn't in any of the pictures. Not one. Her hand reached out, hesitated, then gently straightened a crooked frame. A small one, from a beach trip they took 3 years ago. She remembered that day vividly, how she'd packed all the towels, cut the fruit, booked the Airbnb, made the playlist for the drive. She had taken the photo. David, Ivy, and Josh smiling at the edge of the water, sun blinding behind them. Mara's shadow visible on the sand, just behind the camera. The closest she ever came to being remembered. They didn't crop me out. They just never put me in. She opened the small cabinet under the gallery. A cluttered mess of cords, picture hooks, and used frames. She dug deeper, finding an envelope of old prints. She sifted through them. School photos. Graduation shots. David and Anna's wedding album. Her hand paused when she found a blurry candid, her own face, caught mid-laugh, arms around Josh during his science fair years ago. It was the only photo she'd seen of herself in the entire house. She turned it over. Nothing written. No date. No Mara and Josh. No note that she'd been there. She set it aside, then picked it back up, unsure why. If I disappeared tomorrow, the house would look exactly the same. Footsteps approached. Ivy appeared behind her, earbuds in, scrolling her phone. She glanced at the photo in Mara's hand. Ivy. What's that? Mara. Just an old picture. Ivy Y, shrugging. Huh. Weird seeing you in one. And then she was gone. No cruelty. No intent. Just casual erasure. Mara stared down at the photo again. Her smile frozen in time. Her arm wrapped around a boy who wouldn't remember the moment. Her joy, undocumented. Unnamed. She slipped the photo into her pocket and closed the cabinet. And thinks. I used to be someone. Now I'm scenery. Background. Useful. Quiet. Forgettable. She stood in the hallway, surrounded by the life she helped build, but never truly belonged to. And for the first time, the loneliness didn't whisper. It screamed. The day had dragged behind Mara like a heavy coat she couldn't shake off. The to-do list, once her anchor, now sat smudged and forgotten on the kitchen counter, its neat rows bleeding ink where wet hands had rested. Meatloaf was burning slightly at the edges. The potatoes had boiled too long and collapsed into cloudy water. She didn't care. She stood at the stove, one hand pressed to the small of her back, the other gripping the countertop. Her head throbbed quietly, just enough to make her blink harder. She couldn't remember the last time she'd truly sat down and eaten a meal hot. Ivy walked in, the thud of her boots making the floorboards echo. She sniffed the air and grimaced. "Is that meatloaf?" she asked, her tone flat with accusation. Mara glanced at her, confused. "You like meatloaf," she said, though her voice came out thinner than she meant. "That was last week," Ivy muttered, rolling her eyes. "God, never mind." She disappeared as quickly as she'd come. No offer to help. "No thanks." Josh followed a few moments later, still on his phone. He peeked at the stove, reached for a roll, and took a bite without asking. "You forgot the garlic," he mumbled with his mouth full. "It tastes better with garlic." And then he was gone too. Mara didn't respond. Her hands kept shaking, even when she tried to still them. The steam from the pot rose into her face. It blurred her vision, or maybe that was something else. Later, they gathered at the table. David sat down without a word, already scrolling through his emails, his phone casting a glow across his plate. Josh barely looked up. Ivy picked at her food as if it was an exam she'd already failed. No one asked how Mara's day was. No one noticed her silence. David mentioned, almost offhandedly, that the PTA had called. They expected her to bake for the upcoming fundraiser, Friday, probably. They assumed she would, because she always did. Mara looked up. "I didn't sign up for that," she said, her voice low. He shrugged. "They just figured you would." Then he mentioned his mother's prescription. Could Mara pick it up? He didn't check her schedule, didn't ask. Just assumed she'd handle it. Because she always did. That was when it happened. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't break a plate or cry. She simply said, "I'm not a calendar." The words floated across the table, quiet but razor-sharp. 3 faces turned toward her. For once, they heard her. But they didn't understand. Ivy blinked, then scoffed, "Geez. Chill." David frowned, confused. "Hey. I didn't mean it like." "I'm not a calendar," she repeated, this time not for them, but for herself. "I'm not a meal plan, or a chauffeur, or a live-in maid. I'm not a ghost either. Not yet." She stood, her chair scraping back on the floor like a protest. No one said a word as she walked away from the table. And no one followed. Later that night, she sat on the edge of their bed in the dark, hands resting in her lap. Her body still. Her mind racing. David entered the room softly. He asked if she was okay, but the question felt like a formality, not an invitation. She didn't look at him. "I can't remember the last time someone asked me that," she said, and actually waited for the answer. He sat beside her. His hand hovered between them but never reached for hers. And when she turned to him, her voice low and steady, she asked, "When did I stop being someone to you?" David's mouth opened, but no words came. The silence between them was no longer peaceful, it was hollow. Sharp around the edges. And it was louder than anything he could have said. It was buried under a pile of catalogs and pizza coupons, the kind of envelope that didn't look like trouble at first glance. Cream-colored, formal, the return address from a law firm in Connecticut. Mara wasn't snooping. She was sorting the mail. That was her job. Everything filtered through her hands before anyone else saw it. The envelope was addressed to David. She hesitated for just a second. Then she opened it. And her world, so delicately built, so painstakingly balanced, tilted. It was a letter from Anna's parents. Ivy and Josh's biological grandparents. Through their attorney. A quiet but firm notification, they were contesting the living arrangement. Challenging Mara's legal role in the children's lives. Because, technically, legally, she was no one to them. No papers had ever been filed. No rights ever granted. For 12 years, Mara had cared for them, loved them, defended them, paid for them. And it meant nothing. The letter was direct. Cold. They were exploring custody options for Josh now that he was still a minor. Reclaiming stability, the letter said. Restoring rightful legacy. There was even a note about the house, how it was still technically owned under the name of Anna Morgan, and that they were reviewing the title and estate arrangements. Mara read it 3 times, slowly. 12 years of wiping noses, signing school forms, cleaning vomit, baking birthday cakes. 12 years of first aid kits and late-night talks and handmade Halloween costumes. 12 years of being mother, wife, caretaker, housekeeper, banker. All unofficial. All erasable. She sat down at the kitchen table, the letter spread before her like a map of her own exile. David had never told her. Had never filed the adoption paperwork. Had never changed the deed. She had assumed. Trusted. Believed love would cover the gaps. Now, it turned out, she was the gap. Her breath came in shallow pulls. Her vision pulsed at the edges. There was no one to call. No one who would understand. The children would choose blood. Of course they would. David? He hadn't even told her. She had sacrificed everything for this family. Even her own fertility, her dreams of carrying a child, which she'd shelved quietly so she wouldn't complicate the family dynamic. Now the truth sat in front of her like a verdict. She had given her life to people who never made space for her name. And at any moment, they could ask her to leave. Mara didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed beside David, watching the ceiling fan slice the darkness in slow, indifferent circles. His breathing was steady, soft. Peaceful. It angered her. How could he sleep? How could he carry a truth that erased her, and still rest like nothing was wrong? She turned away from him and stared at the wall. There were photos above the dresser. Ivy's graduation. Josh's 5th birthday. A beach day from years ago, David's arm around her waist, her face turned toward him in mid-laugh. She remembered that day. She had bought the tickets, packed the cooler, loaded the car, driven the entire way. David had made the sandwiches, but they forgot to bring them. The kids laughed at his mistake for hours. But in every retelling, David planned that trip. She was just there. In the morning, she moved through the house like a ghost. Made breakfast. Ironed shirts. Checked the online bank account while the coffee brewed. She stared at the login screen for a long time. It was under David's name. Everything was. Later, Ivy asked where her black boots were. Mara didn't answer. Just kept folding laundry, her hands methodical. Josh needed help printing a school paper. She directed him to the printer and walked away. David mentioned dinner with his coworkers that weekend. Mara nodded. Didn't offer to iron his shirt. She wasn't angry, not in the way she used to understand anger. It was something deeper now. Colder. Like grief. Something was dying inside her. Not love. Not hope. Belonging. That night, she pulled out her journals, dozens of them, stacked neatly in the back of her closet. Years of grocery lists and feelings scribbled in margins. Little moments that no one else remembered. She flipped through the pages, looking for proof she had lived here. Loved here. She found entries like, Ivy got a B on her chemistry test. She pretended not to care, but I could see the pride in her eyes. Josh fell asleep on my chest tonight. Still smells like grass and peanut butter. David touched the small of my back while I was cooking. That one touch lasted all day. She closed the notebook. None of it mattered. None of it made her legal. Tangible. Permanent. The letter was still in her apron pocket. She reread it in the laundry room, surrounded by the scent of detergent and the hum of the dryer. It felt like a courtroom had been dropped into her home. She folded it back up and slid it under the mattress. Not ready yet. Not tonight. Instead, she stood in front of the mirror and stared at her own reflection for a long time. Noticing, for the first time, that no one else ever did. I've spent 12 years proving I belong. Turns out, I was never on the list. The next morning, Mara made French toast. Ivy liked hers crispy, with strawberries on the side. Josh preferred his soft, soaked in syrup. David didn't care either way, he'd eat what was on the plate. They didn't notice she wasn't eating. They never did. After breakfast, Mara packed a quiet rebellion into her tote bag, her marriage certificate, her insurance card, her driver's license, her journals. She took the spare keys off the hook, made a copy, and slipped one into the back of her wallet. At the UPS store, she paid for scans of every document with her own debit card, the one tied to the account she barely used. Then she transferred the files to a USB drive and dropped it into an envelope labeled "in case." No one would find it unless she wanted them to. At the bank, she checked the joint account balance. Her name was there, but as secondary holder. David's name came first. His permissions came first. His signatures counted more. She didn't withdraw anything. Not yet. But she opened a separate account anyway, using her maiden name. The woman at the counter asked if she wanted to set up online access. Yes, Mara said. I want to see what's mine. Back home, the house buzzed with casual noise. Ivy arguing with a friend on speakerphone. Josh asking for lunch money. David laughing at a meme on his phone. No one asked where she'd been. No one noticed the folders in her bag. The tired set of her shoulders. The small, quiet hurricane forming behind her eyes. She answered questions. Gave what was asked. But she didn't offer anything more. Something had changed. She wasn't performing anymore. She was documenting. Preparing. She walked the rooms of the house differently now, like a visitor, taking mental notes. That's the drawer where she kept their immunization records. That's the bathroom she scrubbed every Sunday. That's the spot on the wall where Ivy wrote her name in pencil the day she grew taller than Mara. She reached out and traced that faint mark with her finger. No one ever bothered to paint over it. But no one ever noticed it, either. That night, David reached for her in bed. His arm slipped around her waist like it had 1,000 times before. But Mara was already turned away, her body still. He didn't press. Didn't ask. And in that silence, Mara understood more than words ever could. They won't know I left until they need something. And I won't be here to give it. The argument started the way most teenage fights do, with something small, stupid, unimportant. Ivy had left a pair of expensive jeans in the washer overnight, and they shrank. Mara had pulled them out that morning, quietly laid them across the dryer, and hoped Ivy wouldn't notice. But Ivy did. And Ivy didn't forgive quietly. She burst into the kitchen just as Mara was pouring coffee, waving the damp denim like a piece of ruined art. These are ruined. You shrank them. They were new. Do you even pay attention to labels? Mara set the mug down, careful not to spill. She opened her mouth to apologize, to explain, but something inside her paused. Paused, because she suddenly couldn't remember the last time Ivy said thank you. For anything. I didn't see the tag, Mara said, voice even. You never see anything that's important to me, Ivy snapped. David, seated at the table scrolling through his phone, looked up. But said nothing. Josh paused mid-cereal bite. The air thickened. Mara exhaled slowly. I try, Ivy. I do everything I can to make things work here. You don't get to play victim, Ivy cut her off, voice rising. You're not even our mom. So stop pretending. The words landed like a slap, hot, sharp, too fast to duck. Mara didn't react right away. Her body froze, but inside her, something cracked. Not from Ivy's words. From David's silence. He didn't protest. Didn't say, she is your mother. Didn't even whisper, that was too far. He just looked down at his phone again. Ivy stormed out of the room. Josh stayed still, caught between hunger and horror. David stood slowly, offered a muted, she didn't mean it like that. But Mara wasn't listening anymore. She picked up the coffee mug and poured it down the sink. Her hands trembled, but her face remained still. The storm was inside now. She went upstairs, closed the door behind her, and sat on the edge of the bed. The house buzzed faintly beyond the walls, footsteps, cabinet doors, the sound of a TV starting up. No apology came. No footsteps climbing the stairs. No knock on her door. She looked around the room. There were pictures on David's nightstand. Ivy in a cheer uniform. Josh with a science fair ribbon. David and Anna on their wedding day. Mara had never touched them. Out of respect. Or maybe fear. Now she understood. There had never been room for her. Downstairs, David turned the volume up. Upstairs, Mara turned her ring on her finger, slowly, rhythmically. That night, she didn't speak at dinner. She didn't eat. She just sat. Present. And completely unseen. I raised them. Taught them to tie their shoes, hold a fork, say please. But I forgot to teach them one thing. That I was a person, too. The next morning, Mara made toast. Not breakfast. Not eggs, or pancakes, or cut fruit arranged in neat bowls. Just toast. 2 slices, browned and dry, placed on the table beside a jar of unopened jam. She didn't ask who wanted what. She didn't set plates for anyone else. She didn't ask anything at all. The kitchen remained silent, even when David came down in his tie and frowned at the counter. No coffee? He asked, lightly. But his voice hit empty space. Mara didn't answer. She was already stepping out the front door. At the bank, she sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes before going inside. She pulled a check from her purse, placed it on her lap. The top corner bore her name, one of the few places in the world where it still lived in ink. She wrote a check to herself. Amount, blank. Memo, everything I gave. Signature, steady. She stared at it for a while. It looked strange, like something real in a world that had always asked her to be invisible. Then, slowly, she tore it in half. Folded it once. Dropped it into the trash. And walked inside. She began giving money away. Not to her family, but to those who actually needed it. A neighbor whose daughter needed braces. A woman at the grocery store who was short $12.40. A former coworker whose lights were about to be shut off. No one thanked her properly. That didn't matter. She wasn't looking for gratitude anymore. She was clearing her conscience. She was cutting the cords. Back home, Ivy barely looked up from her laptop. Josh asked where his soccer jersey was. David asked what was for dinner. Mara answered none of them. She stood at the kitchen table, flipping through a folder of old bills. The ones she had paid. The ones they never knew existed. She clipped them together and placed them in a box in the hall closet. She was building a monument. A silent one. Later that night, she sat in the dark with the checkbook in front of her. There were only a few pages left. The pages looked like tombstones. She pulled out a pen, paused, and wrote her name. Not on a check, but at the top of a blank journal page. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't write something for someone else. She wrote for herself. There's nothing left to give. And nothing left to prove. So I'll stop writing checks for other people's lives. And start signing my own name on mine. The house didn't fall with a bang. It sagged. Slowly. Quietly. The laundry piled up. Mail went unopened. Ivy's FAFSA deadline passed without a whisper. Josh missed the bus, twice. No one packed his lunch. He ate chips and vending machine crackers until a teacher noticed. The fridge stayed bare for 2 days before David finally noticed. Didn't we need groceries? He asked. Mara looked at him, blankly. I thought you handled that, she said. He blinked. Opened his mouth. Closed it again. She walked past him and into the yard, a cup of tea in hand. No coat. Just silence. That Monday, David's boss called. You missed the proposal deadline. The client's walking. David hadn't realized. His calendar, usually pristine, had holes in it now, holes where Mara used to quietly plug in reminders, reconfirm appointments, manage his life like a second career. He hung up the call and leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands cradling his forehead. He hadn't slept well in weeks. Mara's distance sat like cold air beside him in bed. Her smile, once his sanctuary, was gone, replaced by an expression he couldn't read anymore. The collapse came on a Tuesday. David walked in the door, his tie loosened, shirt soaked at the collar from stress sweat. His hand shook slightly as he dropped his keys in the bowl. Mara was folding laundry on the couch, quietly, mechanically. David reached for a water glass. It slipped. Shattered. He froze, staring at it like he didn't know what it was. Then his legs buckled. Mara dropped the laundry and was by his side before the kids even realized something was wrong. The lights buzzed overhead. Mara sat in a cold plastic chair, her purse clutched in her lap. A nurse approached with a clipboard. Are you his wife? Mara hesitated. Yes, she said. The nurse glanced down. You're listed here as stepmother. Are you next of kin? The words were routine. Casual. But to Mara, they echoed like a verdict. She gave the necessary information. Waited. Thought about the grocery list she didn't write, the bills she hadn't paid, the family she was letting unravel. And didn't feel guilt. Only relief. David was fine, exhaustion, stress, mild dehydration. They let him sleep. When he woke, she was still there. Sitting in the dark, her back straight, her expression unreadable. Thank you, he whispered. She nodded once. But her eyes never met his. He fell. And for once, I didn't break with him. It started with a search for an insurance form. David, still recovering, had asked Ivy to help him find his medical file. Top shelf in the hall closet, he said, waving a hand toward the hallway. It's in a manila folder. I think. Josh trailed behind her, disinterested until he saw the mess inside. Old phone chargers, expired coupons, batteries that may or may not still work. And a box. A plain, medium-sized cardboard box. Taped carefully. Labeled in Mara's handwriting. Paid. Ivy raised an eyebrow. Weird. Josh shrugged. Just old receipts or something. But something made Ivy sit down and open it. Inside, dozens of envelopes. Labeled by year. Tidy. Precise. Each one stuffed with canceled checks, payment confirmations, typed notes. All organized. All dated. Ivy flipped through one envelope from the year she turned 16. $800 for violin lessons. $145 for a lost school textbook. $350 for counseling sessions after her breakup. $240 for new glasses. All signed, Mara Morgan. Josh reached into another envelope. $75 for cleats. $1,200 to cover a medical bill from his broken wrist. $60 monthly for his math tutor. Then another. $2,500 to help cover Anna's hospital bills during her final months, years before Mara had even been officially part of the family. Ivy's breath caught. She found a note, handwritten on the back of an envelope. Ivy didn't eat dinner tonight. She's sad. I don't think she knows I know. But I'll keep the porch light on, just in case she needs to come talk. Josh found one too. Josh had nightmares again. Slept on the floor beside his bed until he calmed. He won't remember tomorrow. But I will. They looked at each other. Speechless. These weren't just receipts. They were records of love, paper evidence of a woman who gave everything without asking for credit. And they had never seen any of it. Not once. Josh whispered, "She paid for all of this." Ivy, who hadn't cried in years, felt her throat close. "I told her she wasn't our mom," she said, voice cracking. Josh looked away. "We didn't know." Later that night. The box now sat on Mara's bed. Unpacked. Exposed. David stood in the doorway with Ivy and Josh behind him, shoulders slumped, eyes red. They didn't call her name. They just stood there and stared at the box. It said more than any of them ever had. She loved us in silence. We answered with noise. And now, we have nothing but paper. And regret. The house was still. Not the kind of stillness that comes when everyone's asleep, but the kind that lingers after something has left the room. Something essential. Something no one can quite name. Mara was gone. Not a suitcase in sight. No closet left bare. No mess. No drama. Just, gone. David found the letter on the kitchen table, placed under a clean mug. The same mug Mara used every morning. Her initials etched in silver at the base, still warm from habit. The envelope was cream-colored. Her handwriting graceful, as always. To David, Ivy, and Josh. They sat in the living room together, silent, unshowered, older than they felt. David opened it with shaking hands. Mara's voice came through with soft, undeniable strength. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I stopped recognizing myself. For 12 years, I paid bills you never saw. I scheduled appointments you never thanked me for. I folded shirts you never noticed were clean. But mostly, I gave you love in ways that didn't look like love to you. You looked for smiles and words. I gave you warm towels, full gas tanks, working lights, and meals on the table. You looked for a mother. I was already being one. But when Ivy told me I wasn't, and no one stood up for me, I finally heard what silence had been trying to say all along. I was replaceable. So I replaced myself, with peace. I hope you find yours, too. Love. Mara." The silence afterward wasn't awkward. It was holy. Ivy cried without hiding it this time. Her head in her hands. She mouthed, "I didn't mean it. But the words couldn't reach now. They were 3 days late. 12 years late. Josh stared out the window. He didn't speak. Just traced his fingers over the checkbook Mara had left behind. David held the letter to his chest. Like if he held it close enough, she might feel it, wherever she was. She didn't scream. Didn't beg. Didn't leave ashes. She just left. Because that's who she was. The woman who wrote the checks. The woman we didn't know how to keep. David found it on the kitchen table the day the lights went out. Not metaphorically, literally. The power bill had gone unpaid. He fumbled through drawers, searching for the checkbook Mara used to keep near the oven, hidden beneath recipe cards and spare pens. It wasn't there. Instead, it sat alone in the center of the table. Open. Waiting. One check remained. His name was written across the top. Neat. Gentle. As if she hadn't been shaking when she wrote it. Amount, left blank. Memo, for everything. There was no address. No return note. No forwarding number. Just her name. Signed like a final goodbye. He sat down, held it in his hands. And for the first time in years, he remembered. The day she fixed the plumbing while he was away. The morning she stitched Josh's costume at 3 a.m. The night she sat in the hospital parking lot until Ivy finished screaming at her. He had said nothing then. Now, there was too much to say, and no one to say it to. Ivy walked in. She saw the check. Saw her father's face. And broke. I told her she wasn't our mom, she whispered. I said it. I meant it. David didn't correct her. He just handed her the check. She held it like it was sacred. Then crumpled to the floor. Later, they placed the check in the drawer where Mara used to keep birthday cards, cards they never opened, never read, never thanked her for. They didn't frame it. They didn't speak of it often. But they left the drawer unlocked. So they'd never forget what they lost. I wrote every check with love. And when love ran out, I signed my name one last time. And left them the balance.